So what's going on guys, Kids here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will show you the top 5 best solo player builds in Albion Online. So for each and every single build I will show you what abilities and armor you wanna get. Then I will explain every single skill and what is the best skill rotation that you wanna use for both PvP and PvE. And then lastly, I will show you the best gameplay, so you would be able to get the best results and highest damage possible and much more. So no matter how much silver you have, or how high or low your weapon levels are, you can easily use these builds and follow the step-by-step guide. So if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then moving over to the first solo player build, which is the Spear. And this is by far one of the best and cheapest builds that any solo player can use. And with our setup, we will be able to dominate every single solo content. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we of course want to go with the Spear. And then for your Q, pick the first option. Then for your W, get the first option as well. And then lastly for your passive, choose the fourth option. And then on top of all of this, for your offhand you want to go with the Torch. Then for your helmet, get the Hunter's Hood and choose the third ability and second passive. Then for your armor, get the Mercenary's Jacket and pick the third ability and second passive. And then lastly for the boots, go with the Soldier Boots and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape, get the Undead Cape, and then for the consumables, go with the Healing Potions and Roasted Clear Haze Snapper. And then lastly, like per usual, I always recommend in your inventory to get few cabbage soups. So then let's go over to the gameplay, and as I don't want to make this video very long, so I will just try to summarize everything in just a minute or two. So Spear is a close to medium ranged weapon, which means that unlike other melee weapons, you don't have to be very close to the enemy to hit your target. So then your Q and W spells are both basic damage dealers, that if you land your shot, then you will build up stacks that will increase your damage even more. Then your E ability will as well do damage, but it's more like a dash. So you want to dash into the enemy with 4 stacks to deal the highest damage possible. Then if we activate the R skill for the next few seconds, we will get our HP back for every single hit that we land on the enemy. And then lastly we have our defensive spells. So when we activate the D skill, it will increase our resistance and reflect 100% of the enemy's damage. And then lastly our F skill is just a simple sprint ability that will give us faster movement speed and heal us at the same time. So then with that said, let's go over to the playstyle, and it works the same in PvP as well in PvE. So then at the start of the fight, we wanna keep on poking the enemy with our basic attack and Q skill. Then when the enemy gets closer or multiple enemies group up, then use the W. Then when you have got to 4 stacks, which you can get just by attacking enemies, then use the E ability. And then lastly for defensive reasons, use the R skill, which after activating you wanna keep on spamming your basic attack to get bunch of HP back. And then as well you can use the D skill to reflect the enemy's damage. And then for your sprint, it's personal preference. You can use it to catch up to enemies or run away from them. And then lastly, because of our cape, when we get below 50% HP, we will become invisible. So if you're looking for a cheap and powerful solo player build, then try this one out and have fun. So then moving over to the second solo build, which is the one and only Bow of Badan. This setup is one of the most fun and powerful bow player builds. So you will for sure enjoy the playstyle of this build, if you like ranged weapons and if you prefer running and gunning. So basically shooting enemies while at the same time escaping them. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we wanna go with the Bow of Badan. And then for your Q, pick the first option. Then for your W, get the second option. And then lastly for your passive, choose the fourth option. Then for your helmet, get the Mage Cowl and choose the third ability and first passive. Then for your armor, get the Assassin's Jacket and pick the third ability and second passive. And then lastly for the boots, go with the Soldier Boots and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape, get the Tetfur Cape, and then for consumables, go with the Healing Potions and Omelet. And then lastly, like per usual, always in your inventory have few cabbage soups and a spare poison potion as well. So then let's go over to the gameplay, where I will try to summarize everything super quickly. So this bow is a ranged weapon, which means that your main playstyle will revolve around running while shooting enemies from distance. So then your Q and normal attacks are just basic damage dealers. Then your W is a mobility spell, that when you use it, it will do damage and launch you on opposite direction, on where you were aiming. Then our E skill is another basic damage spell, that will shoot a magic arrow, as there are no stacks, so you want to use the spell right away as soon as it comes off cooldown. Then for your R skill, when you activate it, you will become invisible. Then your D skill will apply poison to your bow, so after activating, your first basic attack will do bunch of damage. And then lastly, we have our F skill, which is a basic mobility spell, that will give us increased movement speed and healing at the same time. So then with that said, let's go over to the rotation, and it works the same way in PvP and PvE. So at the start of the fight we want to use the normal attack, Q, D and E, as much as we can. There's no one best specific way or order that you should use your spells. So as long as you know that you can hit your target, then use all you got, but then save your W and F skills for mobility, so to run away or towards the enemy. And then as far as your invisibility spell goes, that is your personal preference, so you can use it to ambush enemies or just to protect yourself. So in a quick summary, if you're looking for another good solo player build that is cheap and amazing at long range fighting, then this is the one for you. So then let's go over to the next solo player build, which are the dual swords. This build is amazing for budget players that want to use a very powerful build in 1v1 corrupted dungeons, or even in open world solo PvP. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we want of course go with the dual swords, and then for your Q pick the first option, then for your W get the first option as well, and then lastly for your passive choose the first option, then for the helmet get the mage cowl and choose the third ability and first passive. Then for the armor, get the mage robe and pick the third ability and first passive. And then lastly for the boots, go with the cultist sandals and choose the third ability and second passive. Then for the cape, get the Tether cape. And for your consumables, go with the poison potions and red spring eel stew. And then like per usual, always in your inventory have few cabbage soups. So then let's go over to the gameplay, where like in previous builds, I will try to summarize everything super quickly. So dual swords is a great melee weapon, which accelerates at close quarter fighting. So then your normal attack and Q are basic single target damage skills. But then your Q skill as well will apply stacks, but they will only increase your attack and movement speed. And this time they won't count towards the E skill. But then your W and E skills are two similar AoE damage spells that will make you immune and damage the enemies in AoE range. Then your R skill is called the Purging Shield, which after activating will give you damage resistance. And if someone attacks you, then all of their positive effects besides healing will get removed. Then your D skill is another damage dealer that will just apply poison to your weapon and do damage to the enemy. And then lastly we have our F skill, and this skill will just give us movement speed, but as well behind yourself you will leave a corrupted ground, which if the enemy walks over, then his damage resistance and healing received will be reduced. So then let's go over to the rotation, and in PvE you can use the skills in whatever order you like. And as we don't have to build up stacks for the E skill, so there's no one particular order. But then for PvP it's a bit different. So at the start of the fight we wanna leap towards the enemy with our E skill, then we use W and Q, and then keep on using auto attacks and D skill whenever available. Then when you see the enemy getting bunch of buffs, or you expect to take damage, then now use the R skill. And then lastly, depending on the fight, use your F skill to run away from the enemy, or just run into him and debuff him at the same time. So in a quick summary, if you're looking for one of the best and most affordable solo PvP builds, then this is the one for you, so enjoy! So then let's go over to one of the last solo player builds, which is the one hand axe, aka the battle axe. And this build is great for self-healing solo playstyle that can easily farm dungeons or enemy players, and by dealing damage regain all of his HP back. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we want to go with the battle axe. And then for your Q, pick the first option. Then for your W, get the first option as well. And then lastly for your passive, choose the second option. And then on top of all of this, for your offhand, go with the Moisak. Then for the helmet, get the Hunter's Hood and choose the third ability and first passive. Then for your armor, get the Mercenary's Jacket and pick the third ability and first passive. And then lastly for the boots, go with the Soldier Boots and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape, get the Undead Cape, and for the consumables, go with the Healing Potions and Roasted Clear Haze Snapper. And then lastly, like per usual, always in your inventory have few cabbage soups. So then let's go over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best skill rotation. So then first of all, your Q and W are basic damage dealers that will do single target damage and apply rending bleed stacks that will do bleed damage over time. This setup is more focused on high single target damage, but if you prefer more AoE type of playstyle, then switch your first Q with the second option, and then for your W, pick the fourth option. But then for your E, we have a great damage dealer that is basically like 2 shots in one skill. So when we use it, we can throw our axe, and the first hit, depending on how many stacks we have applied to the enemy, will do a bunch of damage. But then right after, we can throw the axe for the second time, and this time we will do damage again, but as well receive self-healing. Then your R, D and F skill I already explained in the previous builds, but basically your R skill will give you more self-healing, then your D skill will reflect 100% of the enemy's damage, and then lastly your F skill is a basic mobility spell, which will give you movement speed and more self-healing at the same time. So then let's go over to the rotation, and both PvP and PvE work the same way. So at the start of the fight, we want to use the normal attacks, Q and W, as much as we can. Then when we get to 3 stacks, aka to 3 rending bleeds, then we use our E skill and throw our axe 2 times. And then lastly, whenever we need self-healing, activate the R skill and keep on using auto attacks to receive self-healing. And then if you expect enemy to do damage, then use your D skill and reflect 100% of his damage. And then lastly, use the F skill to run away or towards the enemy. And that's about it. So if you're looking for one of the best solo player lifestyle builds, then for sure check this one out and have fun. So then moving over to the last and final build, which is the carving sword. So then let's go over to the build, and for the weapon we wanna go with the carving sword. And then for your Q, pick the first option. Then for your W, get the third option. And then lastly for your passive, choose the first option. Then for your helmet, get the mage cowl and choose the third ability and first passive. Then for your armor, get the Hellion jacket and pick the third ability and first passive. And then lastly for the boots, go with the scholar sandals and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape, get the Tether cape. And then for the consumables, get the resistance potions and red spring ale stew. And then like per usual, always in your inventory have few cabbage soups. So then let's go over to the gameplay, and your normal attack and Q are basic damage abilities that will do damage and apply stacks. Then your W is an AoE skill that will slam the ground in 13-meter range, and if the enemy gets hit, then he will get rooted for 2 seconds and take bunch of damage. Then your E is a dash skill that will of course dash and deal damage, and on top of that you can even decrease the enemy's resistance depending on how many stacks you have applied. Then your R skill will create an aura that in 7-meter range will deal damage and steal 100% of what the enemy has lost, and you can use the skill on multiple enemies. Then our D skill we already covered twice in this video. And then lastly we have our F skill, which will increase our movement speed and restore energy every second. So then let's go over to the playstyle, and at the start of the fight we want to use the normal attacks Q and D as much as possible. Then if the enemy tries to run, or if you can cancel his animation, then use the W skill and root the enemy. Then when you have max stacks, then use the E skill and dash into the enemy. And then lastly use the R skill to create an aura that will give you HP back for every HP that the enemy loses. And then lastly, don't forget about our F skill, and feel free to use it to run into the enemy or run away from him, or you can just even activate it to regain more energy while fame farming. This build has great damage, and most skills can be used offensively and defensively, so this setup is very versatile and can be used for any type of solo content. So what are you waiting for? Check this build out, and like per usual, I hope you have fun. So with that said, I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, feedback or other good Albion online builds that you would like to see in the next video, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and you won't miss any more amazing content from me. With all this said, you have an amazing day and I will see you in my next video, so take it easy, peace.